Brendan, hey, congratulations on your short film, The Metal Detector.
Thank you so much, Gag. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And who's that with you?
This is Nina. The
Nina.
her brother is somewhere.
Hi, Nina.
So, Brendan, let's start with this. What sparked you to do this, short documentary, The Metal Detector?
Oh, well, so I got a funny phone call from my cousin Amelia, who is also the executive producer on this film, where she had gone to see one night in 2019 her son's drumming teacher perform a one-man show. And the show was about his father being on a B-17 and the plane crashing and him parachuting out of it and being a POW and then their relationship. Um, and she was just blown away by it. And so in the lobby afterwards, she was like, Mick, the story is amazing. And he hadn't performed the show in 20 years. And she said, why did you revive this thing? And he said he had received a phone call from this guy in Austria named Georg, and in a week, he was going to be flying to Austria to meet all the other children of the men who had parachuted out of this airplane. And she said, that is insane. I'm going to call my cousin, Brendan, who is a filmmaker, and his wife is a cinematographer. My wife was the DP on this project. And 5 days later, my wife Emily was on an airplane to Austria in order to capture this whole weekend as it unfolded, where Georg assembled all these sort of bewildered Americans into his living room so he could show them all these plane parts.
Wow, so you basically dropped everything and immediately went on this trip for yourself. So, what was your initial impression when you met Georg?
Oh, well, here's the funny thing. I have never met Georg in person. I did all of this from Los Angeles. We had a we have a young child. And so Emily was going to be the camera woman. And so I basically directed it from Los Angeles while she was there. So Georg and
Really?
I Georg and I have spoken many times and email all the time and have zoomed, but we've never actually been in the same room, despite spending the last 5 years depicting him in this movie, which is really funny. I can't wait to hopefully meet him someday.
So you directed your wife to ask Georg's all the questions and handle all the cinematography. That's a lot of trust and faith.
Oh, it's true. And we found a guy in Austria who is sort of like the Austrian unit director, for lack of a better term. He was a second camera, and he was a friend of the family actually, and he spoke German. Neither of my wife nor I speak German, so that was another tricky situation. But so we had a local guy, the question asker, and he made a lot of important decisions, and he made a lot of really important contributions to the film on a directorial level as well. So he's listed. His name is Clemens Thurn, and he's listed as the Austrian unit director.
Now, tell us the area that Georg, made this search for the B-17. I guess Georg is from a Greg, Austria. I mean, is that like out in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah, it's about 2 hours from Vienna, 2 hours southwest of Vienna. You get to this town. It's a smaller town. Graz is a JV city, basically, in Austria. And he lives on the outskirts of Graz. So he lives in this house. His house is a name. And it's been in his family for hundreds of years. And his mother in 1944 was standing on their front lawn and watched the plane as it crashed into the neighboring hillside. And so told Georg about this his whole life. This was family lore about the famous B-17 that crashed that his mother saw. And so when he retired, he grabbed a metal detector and he looked around and he sort of was like, I think it must be that hill over behind the monastery. And so he asked the monks if he could go back there, and they're like, sure, why not? Jawohl, or whatever, And they go, and he goes, and he didn't expect to find anything at first, but he was like, maybe I'll find something. Beep, 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 and immediately found all sorts of parts, like right away, just pulling up the entire airplane, because history itself and sort of the twisted metal and blood of the war, it was 1 inch below the surface of the ground. And it's a fascinating, very hilly. It's very much like, oh, actually, who's Arnold Schwarzenegger is from right nearby. He's from like 5 minutes away. It's his area of Austria, hills, like the hills filled with the sound of music.
Wow. I can't believe everything is still there, 70 years later. I guess it has to be an archaeological find. I'm amazed Georg didn't, like call in other people to help.
Yeah, I know, right? And when he had everyone there, the the American children of these GIs, he took them up there, and then they found a bunch more stuff. They found a piece of a flak vest. They found a bullet. It's crazy. It's just all. That's the interesting thing for me about this is that for the Austrians, the history of their dark past is just right below the surface, even culturally. There's a um, there's a German word I learned in the making of this movie, which is Erinnerungskultur, which means uh, rem- culture of remembrance, and it's something where Germans and Austrians very dutifully face their dark history, and so that they can learn from it so that it will never happen again. And Georg is the living embodiment of this, where he's like, no, we have to examine this and we have to do the stern work of reconciliation of our dark past. And I wish there was more of an ethic of that in the United States, of facing even the darker parts of our history so that we can prevent atrocities from happening in the future.
Brendan, could you tell us about recreating these GI stories? For because a lot of these stories for some of us seem to be lost now these days.
Oh, it's true. Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you what's really interesting. When you watch movies about World War II, there's often this sense of kind of there's a mythologizing, Um, the only movie I've ever seen that it doesn't mythologize World War II Catch 22, but the rest of them are all there's a sense of the daring do, and of course of these were all this was a very heroic generation of people that marched off to this horrible conflict. But what's really interesting is the documentary that Mick's father Dan produced by dictating to the secretary, this 20-page autobiography of the war that was dictated in 1945 is so real. It feels like it could be it could be now, it could be today. He was kind of ne'er do well, you know what I mean? Like he was always getting in trouble with the military police. He was always going off the base and getting drunk and getting arrested in whatever town they were in. When they traveled with the B-17 itself, and so they had to take it in stages all the way to Italy. And so I think they took it to South America, and then they hopped over to Africa, and then again in Africa, and then they couldn't go in one go to Italy back then. And in every single town they stopped in, he got in serious trouble. And he's like, gambling and drinking and carousing and stuff, and miss it. And sometimes he would almost miss the plane as it was leaving, and stories are much less often told, of like human beings in all their glorious human folly, um, trying to make their way through a gigantic moment in history. And I think that's always the contrast. And when we look back at gigantic moments in history, we assume the people are as gigantic and glorious, but sometimes they're just humans, just like us. You know what I mean? And they're just humans. And those are the people to whom giant moments in history happen. And that contrast, I think, is really fascinating.
I can tell you love this type of storytelling, especially this historical trying to find the tidbits into the storytelling.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. There's the old phrase like when they're talking about Broadway musicals that they have to have. I used to direct theater, and in musicals, like it doesn't matter how good any set elements are or any of the design elements, you have to have the right music. And because they say, well, they don't come out humming the scenery, you know what I mean? And it's the same thing with stories like this. It's the music is the human beings. You could have all the plot and all the fascinating context in the world, but if you don't have the humans that these things happen to, then you don't have a story.
That is true. That is true. Well, Brendan, let me leave with one last thought here. As audiences everywhere are going to have a chance to watch your um, the Metal Detector, especially on PBS. What is the one most important take you hope they walk away with?
The take I think I hope they walk away with is how inspiring Georg's curiosity and compassion are. And I wish there were a word for a combination of curiosity and compassion. He has such compassion for the men that jumped out of the airplane, and he has such curiosity about what will happen if you bring human beings together. And in a day and age when we are all getting so much more isolated, and we're all made to we're all becoming addicted to these little pocket televisions that just make us sad. You know what I mean? Like, how often do you end up sitting through the potential awkwardness of being in a stranger's living room with a bunch of other strangers, and the only thing you have in common is something that makes you really vulnerable? And the magic of what happens when you combine strangers with a common vulnerability, and the compassion and the curiosity that would lead you to do such a crazy thing, that is what I wish I could bottle, and that is what I wish viewers, and I hope viewers will come away with, like, what would happen if I reached out to randos who, and introduce them to each other and see how they get to know one another and help each other heal.
That's true. I mean, it's technically two different stories you actually told. It's the GI story and the adventure of Georg and the Americans coming together to retell those stories. So,
That's true.
Brendan, thank you very much for speaking to us about the metal detector coming up on PBS really soon. So, hey, you know what? It is a terrific mini documentary. Everyone should watch it, especially for Veterans Day.
Thank you, Gig. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and I really appreciate your time.
Hey, appreciate it. Hopefully we do this again. Thank you.
Definitely.